I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the first ever production BMW M8. There was, in fact, a V12 M8 way back in 1990, but seeing they only ever built one of them, this beastly machine should be the BMW gracing a poster on your wall or phone background. Does anyone even do posters anymore? Anyway, this flagship M8 competition made its world debut in June 2019 and is finally here on Australian soil, costing a smidge over 350 grand. The regular M8 won't be coming here because Aussies don't like to finish second. And as its name implies, the M8 competition is all about winning something. So what makes the M8 different to the M850i that it's based on? Well, it's all about the breathing, and it starts right here. This front bumper bar is completely bespoke, and unlike the very slightly insipid 850i's that has angles go in here and just a scoop in the middle, this one has fangs, and they stick out to the side like that with a completely different styling here. This car in particular also has a carbon effect pack that covers this splitter and these little bits, as well as the side gills, the mirrors, the rear spoiler, and the rear diffuser for $10,300. But they are really nice. Coming around to the side here, the 850i also has a side gill, but it doesn't have this little spear that the M8 has. These wheels here are a no-cost option on the car, and they're that almost competition-esque star spoke that BMW has now been fitting to these cars for a while, and I think they look sensational, as well as these Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, 275 at the front, 285 at the back, that are part of that no-cost option. Also no cost, weirdly, is the paint. It's Frozen Marina Bay Blue. I can never remember that bloody name, and it is spectacular. I love it. You can also get it in orange and grey, which are the two other colours we normally see, but because you're paying, well, $380,000 in the case of this car, you don't have to pay anything extra for it. Now, if we come around the back, surprisingly, the M8 is actually simpler to look at than the M850i. It has its own completely bespoke bumper that isn't as fussy as the car below it. It only has a simple reflector on the side here instead of a fake air intake or air outlet, and the reflector running across the top. And these four massive exhaust pipes are much cooler and tougher than the trapezoidal things that the M850i has. Plus, there's also that terrific carbon fibre double bubble roof that has become a bit of a hallmark of BMW M Coupes. And if you thought that paying 350 grand for a coupe seemed a little bit silly, well then I bring you this. A boot that is so deep that I can just about bury myself into it, and has both backseat backrests that fold down and extend that luggage capacity because, well, the back seats are pretty crap for people. There you go. So while there isn't a whole lot different outside in the M8 compared to the M850i, everything that does change is for the better, and the same implies inside. There's nothing in this car that is optional. Everything is standard, including these really cool Barron Wilkins stereo, which is excellent, with this cool little lit up graphic in the tweeters. These seats are outstanding, and even though they look like they're fixed back race buckets, they actually have headrests that electrically raise and lower. We've got suede on the sides of the seats here and on the glove box. We've got a completely suede roof lining, a lot of little M detailing like around the gear lever here with the M colours and on the seat belts, as you'd expect. This lovely diamond stitching in the doors with perforation. The BMW wheel, of course, with the M buttons on it, which you can configure to be one that's a little bit more hardcore than the other, so you don't have to be stuffing around on a screen as you go when you drive. However, there is an M mode button here, which you can just press straight away when the engine's running, and you can set up the M mode right here, and below that is another button that says setup, and you can actually play around with everything from engine, chassis, steering, and even brakes while this car's driving, without fiddling around here or fiddling around here. Your eye line's here, and you just go sport, comfort, sport, sport plus, whatever. I think that's genius. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it. And the same applies with wireless Apple CarPlay, which I know is in any BMW, but here it's just as seamless and just as excellent as it is in all other modern BMW cars. About the only thing you can really pick on the M8 about, and it's probably not such a big criticism because it is essentially a 2+2, is that this is a big, heavy car. It's more than 1900 millimeters wide and 4.8 meters long, yet it's really only a two-seater. The back seat cannot really fit people, certainly not without a big compromise in the front, and you do feel quite enclosed in the car, given the size of it compared to the size of the interior. That said, I kind of like the intimacy of it, and I love the layout. This is BMW at its absolute best. So compared to the M850i that the M8 shares its 4.4 litre twin-turbo V8 with, there's been a couple of modifications, namely more rigid engine mounts, improved lubrication and cooling, and there's an additional engine cooler and a transmission cooler. Power jumps from 390 kilowatts to 460 kilowatts, and torque, which is the same as the regular M8 that we don't get in Australia, is 750 Newton meters from 1800 to 5,800 RPM, and we have an 8-speed automatic. So if there's one thing this 1800 plus kilo beast isn't lacking, it's performance and transmission ratios. BMW claims 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds, and the car that we get in Australia, because this is extremely relevant for our country, has its top speed extended to 305 k's an hour. Although I reckon this thing would probably stretch to about 330 if you let it wind out somewhere that was in another hemisphere from where we are right now. I've also got the exhaust button turned on here, so you get that constant burble the whole time, which is beautiful. Yet when you really get stuck into it and wind it down a couple of gears and then just gas it in one gear, and I'm going to do it now because I can, and then back off, it does those massive cracks. And while it seems kind of violent, this transmission is actually really nicely refined and does a really good job of just making this amazing beast of a coupe just lift and thrust. It's like being caught on top of a tsunami. It just like picks you up and throws you forward, but it's also velvety and smooth at the same time. So while you've got that animal burble to it, it's also kind of beautiful and refined. And maybe that doesn't quite sit with what BMW wants it to be, because they want this M8 to be a true sports car. But I think that its real calling is as an absolutely ballistic GT. Chassis-wise, the M8 is closely related to the M850i in that both of them are X-Drive cars, which means they have all-wheel drive. Though in this car, it has all-wheel drive plus, Sport Plus, which means it transfers even more of the drive to the back than it would in normal all-wheel drive, and you can turn all-wheel drive off completely. You can have a two-wheel drive mode where you can drift the absolute shit out of this thing on a track with no stability control. But I would never do that on the road because I don't really want to bend a 380 Gran Coupe. Anyway, other than that, there's some bracing up the front. It's got bracing from the struts to the firewall, and it has some bracing across the back axle to make it more rigid and a better connection between it and the body. It also has forged rear suspension arms and, of course, model-specific tuning for the M8 over the normal M850i. However, the biggest difference here is that it doesn't have rear-wheel steering. And normally I would say in a BMW like this, they need to have it to really make up for the fact that they're so fucking fat and bloated and can feel like that sometimes, but the M8 just doesn't feel like that. It completely transcends the fact that it weighs more than 1,800 kilos and has all that all-wheel drive thrust out of corners. Now you can pick on it for having all-wheel drive, I suppose, and say, well, doesn't that ruin the purity of the car? But there's this lovely sweetness to the car's turn-in. You can get on the gas really early and just feel the tail of the car thrusted out of a corner. I don't think that the essence of the M8 is all about being sideways everywhere. I actually love the fact that it's all-wheel drive, much as in the 850i below it. This particular car also has optional carbon ceramic brakes. They cost 16.5 grand, and it means you've got 400mm front discs and 390mm discs in the back. You also have this completely intriguing and first for BMW setup where you can go through, set up here, And on your little screen here, you have brake, comfort and sport, and you can actually change the braking assistance in the brakes from being what they are now, which is comfort and nice and progressive and cushy, or you can have sport where they're actually quite sharp and they're much better for performance driving without being too overly sensitive like they would be in, say, a hybrid or something like that. Ultimately, the M Competition perhaps isn't quite the 911 bashing sports car that BMW M wants it to be. For all its detail excellence, it's simply too heavy to be a true race car for the road. But it's such a stunningly accomplished beast. The fact that it's more a supersonic GT than a screaming sports car is the very essence of its charm and appeal. And while I'm positive that it can annihilate any racetrack in the world, its true character lies in the fact that it's a heavyweight boxer with table manners. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on the BMW M8 Competition or on chasing cars. Thanks for watching.